For 20 years, Coast Guard officer Greg Watt had been watching these waters and felt like he'd experienced everything. He'd seen wreckage from sunken ships, old fishing gear left behind, and the odd pleasure boat that had wandered off course. But nothing could have gotten him ready for what came out of the Atlantic mist that day. The form moving through the fog was impossible to understand, floating with clear direction toward Ireland's shore like a spirit vessel from somewhere else entirely. Ireland's coastline is like paradise for visitors, with its stunning cliff faces, sweeping green countryside, and amazing Atlantic Ocean scenery. But on one cold morning, both visitors and locals were stunned when they spotted what appeared to be a totally strange ship floating off the Mayo County shore. They had no idea it was bringing a puzzling message. Everyone who gathered to look and gaze from the shore quickly worked out which direction the unusual object was heading as it bobbed and swayed with the water. Before long, it became obvious that the odd vessel was simply floating wherever the current pushed it. The watchers decided it was time to contact the police and the Coast Guard. That morning, when Greg Watt got the unusual phone call, he was doing his regular work. He hurried to the location as soon as he saw the confusing object moving through the fog in the distance. Whatever this thing was, it was massive as it got closer. But when he got a clearer view, he was shocked by what he discovered. It was clearly some type of vessel. All he could hope for was that no one was trapped inside. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years on the job," Greg whispered to his partner as they came near. The Coast Guard crew sensed something was off as they moved closer. The mysterious thing looked like it had no business being in the water, especially not out in the open ocean, and it didn't resemble any vessel they'd ever encountered before. But why was it there? Was someone on it? Greg moved up alongside the object and called out through his loudspeaker. But when no one responded, he couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling that came over him. Greg and his crew were met with total quiet. They got on board and prepared themselves for whatever they might discover inside. After several tense minutes, however, what they found gave them more mysteries than solutions. There was no time to lose. The wind began getting stronger, making waves that could have destroyed the entire craft. After attaching their boat to this strange ocean discovery, the Irish Coast Guard slowly pulled it back to land. Now they could examine the puzzle more thoroughly since they were safe on solid ground. The vessel looked like someone had been making it their home. Greg felt shivers go down his spine as he wondered what could have happened to the boat's mysteriously absent occupants. Where were the people who had been on this strange boat? And why had they been traveling across the ocean in such an oddly designed craft? "This thing looks more like a camping trailer than a boat," one of the Coast Guard workers said, shaking his head in amazement. Everyone who looked at the craft was shocked it had managed to keep floating at all, since it resembled a house on wheels more than a boat. The homemade vessel was built from pieces of driftwood and had chunks of foam attached to the bottom to help it stay up. The wooden outside was covered with thick black coating to protect the boat from weather. Looking back, Greg said it was the most unusual thing he had ever seen, until he discovered the hastily scribbled message inside. "Because it's so large, the shape itself is really strange," Greg told news reporters afterward. "At first, I thought it might be a trailer, but the boat was actually set up for living," he continued. A fresh clue brought the investigators right to the solution. A name written in black marker on the inside surface. Rick Small, a man from Thunder Bay, Ontario, was well known in his community, and even though he lived on the opposite side of the planet, his adventures were about to amaze the people of Mayo County, a peaceful coastal town. You see, Rick was considered pretty odd and had a very unique way of seeing the world. Greg wanted to figure out this mystery, so he looked into Rick Small. He searched everywhere for any details about the man, and when his research led him all the way to Canada, he was extremely curious. It came out that Rick had always backed clean energy and spoke strongly about environmental issues. Rick had become well known for an amazing trip across Canada on a special solar-powered bicycle he named Light Dragon. This three-wheeled bike had 6 solar panels that ran a 48-volt system with a 500-watt motor and 600 watts of solar power. The trip took him 114 days to finish, traveling 7,000 kilometers at an average speed of 27 kilometers per hour. It has a 500-watt motor, Rick had explained to CBC during his famous ride. It's a 48-volt system, and I have 600 watts of solar panels, and that's what I'm traveling across the country with. The solar panels let Rick cook, warm up, light up, and run his tricycle completely without outside power. He could charge up while riding, when slowing down, when stopping to collect trash, or while chatting with interested locals. "It's been amazing. It's been really simple," Rick had said during his trip. "The tough days are gray days, when it begins to rain and things like that, so I'll have to stop and make camp for the day." His next major goal was creating a completely independent boat that he planned to live on in the waters around Foxtrot Marina in Newfoundland. But Rick's hopes for his floating house were even larger and more daring than anyone knew. Rick wanted to sail his houseboat as well as live on it, but his ideas kept shifting. He told various people various things about his final goal. To some, he said he wanted to sail his craft from Newfoundland through the Gulf of Alaska. To others, he stated he wanted to take it across the Atlantic to show that solar power could make the trip. Finally, he decided on a plan to sail from Newfoundland around the Arctic to demonstrate that the ice was melting because of climate change. He started by constructing the weird 20-foot boat out of leftover materials, driftwood and plywood. The boat looked more like a camper than a water-worthy craft, complete with solar panels attached to the top. But the building was extremely makeshift and wobbly. Timothy John Ewart, a local sailor in Conception Bay, first spotted the craft in September 2015. "The boat was sitting there by my street," Ewart remembered. "I do a lot of sailing myself, and I thought, I've got to talk to this guy because I've never seen anything like it." When Ewart talked with Rick, he quickly understood how unprepared the vessel was for ocean travel. The boat's steering system was just a piece of plywood attached to a plastic pipe, Ewart told the BBC later. The motors barely had enough strength to move the boat. Rick was living on the boat while he fixed it up, using it as his house. During their talk, Rick made remarks about the number of gas-burning engines around and his environmental worries. "I asked him what his plan was," Ewart said. "He said he wanted to take it across the Atlantic. He wanted to prove that solar power can do it. But could his unique ship survive the Atlantic Ocean's strong waves?" Ewart, an experienced sailor who had finished 5 transatlantic trips himself, had doubts. You could see that he put his knowledge into it. But when you have an idea in your head, sometimes it doesn't always work out, especially when you're dealing with something like the North Atlantic because it's not something you can control, Ewart said. Of course, the Canadian Coast Guard was concerned when Rick contacted them and explained his plan. "Sir, we strongly recommend against this journey," the Coast Guard officer told Rick over the phone. "Your vessel isn't built for ocean crossing." They warned Rick not to make the trip because they were scared his houseboat wouldn't survive. The officials managed to talk him out of attempting the risky crossing, but Rick was set on testing his creation. Rick only managed to travel about 20 kilometers up the Newfoundland coast before reality hit. "I saw him on the bay his first day out," shared local resident Ted Perrin on Facebook. "Completely calm, no waves at all. The next day or so after we had northeast winds which are terrible here. Guess he learned quickly that the North Atlantic is no joke." When Rick left the area, witnesses saw him standing on top of the boat using a long piece of 2x4 wood to push his way out because the current was preventing the boat from moving correctly. The homemade steering system and weak motors turned out to be completely useless for real ocean conditions. After his failed try, the boat ended up tied to a dock in Portugal Cove St. Phillips, about 30 minutes north of where Rick had begun. But the boat had become an ugly sight, and Rick was eventually made to move it from Foxtrap Marina. Where was Rick, though? The first thing the authorities feared was that Rick had drowned at sea, or something even worse had occurred, but the reality was quite different. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Something big must have made him change his mind, said Rodney Mercer, who belongs to Foxtrap Marina. He knew exactly what he was going to do and what he was making. Seeing it floating out there with that letter really surprised me. Instead of trying the risky trip himself, Rick had clearly given up on his dream and left a note that would move people all over the world. The note said, "I, Rick Small, am giving this boat to a young person who has no home, so they can have a better life that people from Newfoundland choose not to live. No rent payments, no house payments, no electric bills." The boat was last seen in Canada at Portugal Cove St. Phillips in late September 2016. But rather than becoming a home for young people without shelter like Rick wanted, the boat apparently broke loose from where it was tied and floated away into the harsh Atlantic Ocean. The amazing trip across the ocean took less than 45 days. The boat, with no one on it, traveled about 3,100 kilometers across the North Atlantic at roughly 69 kilometers per day, about as fast as someone walking slowly. Because of Atlantic Ocean currents moving east, the boat drifted toward northern Europe and finally washed up on Ireland's coast. Before long, crowds of people came to the shore to see Rick's incredible boat themselves. The local government finally had to take it away from the coast because too many people were gathering around it. Irish officials stored it away, hoping Rick would come get it. But no one knew where Rick Small was for 3 years. After his solar-powered houseboat was pulled onto the Irish coast in Mayo County, nobody had seen Rick Small since the boat went missing from the Canadian harbor. This must have happened because something important changed, Rodney Mercer thought. He knew clearly what he was building and what he wanted to do. It was shocking to see it floating away with that note. Something must have changed completely for this to happen. People in the area said many wondered if he had really been on the boat when it sailed across the Atlantic, even though he sometimes went away to live by himself in the wild. The mystery got deeper when Rick couldn't be contacted for his thoughts about his boat's incredible trip. The boat itself showed the story of its journey. Coast Guard workers were amazed to find 2 tea kettles still inside the boat. The same kettles that had been photographed during Rick's trip across Canada on his solar bicycle. You have to respect him, because if the boat had rolled over or flipped, those kettles wouldn't still be there, Ewart said. I'm really surprised that it made it, and that it arrived mostly in one piece. In Ireland, Rick Small's houseboat got so much attention that several businesses wanted to make it an official local monument. Also, the story of how the houseboat came to Ireland and the man who built it became well known because it was an unselfish gift to the town's homeless people. The mystery was finally answered 3 years later when a Canadian reporter, Adam Sawatsky, met Rick by accident on Vancouver Island. I stopped to talk with Rick because of the amazing solar vehicle he was using, Sawatsky said on Twitter. I never thought I'd hear his connection to an international ocean mystery. Rick, now 62 years old, told CTV News that he was surprised to see his boat had reached Ireland mostly undamaged. He said that when he couldn't find the right engine to help with his Arctic trip, he had given the boat away, though he said he didn't know how it ended up crossing the Atlantic. Rick's message was simple and clear. The boat had somehow floated almost 12,500 miles from the Canadian island of Newfoundland to the Irish shore near County Mayo. Rick Small's creative boat had two purposes: to get others to think about solar power as a real choice instead of fossil fuels, and to provide shelter for someone who needed it. Unusual things sometimes wash up on Ireland's beaches, but Rick Small's solar-powered houseboat was different from anything the Coast Guards on duty and the local people had ever seen. The boat was eventually fixed by local volunteers and community groups. It now sits on display at a community garden in nearby Binghamstown, where it's called the Solar Ark, a lasting reminder of one man's environmental dream and giving spirit. In all my years working these waters, I've never seen anything quite like this, Greg thought months later. It wasn't just the boat itself, but the story behind it, the hard work, the dreams, and finally the gift to help others. We believe that Rick's amazing determination and the spirit of his gift will continue for many years to come, wherever he might be. His houseboat, now safely displayed on the shores of Ireland, stands as proof of the power of human creativity, caring for the environment, and the lasting message of hope that can cross oceans, borders, and time itself. Did you like this story? If you had to give away something you worked really hard on, what would you want it to be used for? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, follow this channel and click like. Sometimes when we give up our dreams, it creates something even more amazing: hope for other people. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Have a wonderful day.